Once again, God's morning, or God's afternoon, or God's evening, depending on when you are watching this sermon. I almost did this sermon series on an unhurried God and slowing down in the face of that knowledge last year during Lent. It was, as you know, a bit of a calmer year than this one. That's probably saying the least, I guess. And I wonder how that would have changed my thoughts in writing this series on slowing down in the face of an unhurried God. It seems to be made for a year like this one. Claudia and I laughed the other night because up on Facebook, one of those panels came up that somebody put down a quote, and it said something to the fact of, "It's been one heck of a year this week." And we both agreed that that's kind of how it feels like right now, is we've packed an awful lot of stuff between virus protocols and earthquake reactions and all those things. I think you probably agree with me that we've packed a year's worth of excitement already into a year that's just barely into spring. Also, if you're like me, we feel like we've been subjected to a year's worth, if not more, of anxiety during this time. And of course, it's not even over yet. And that's why I'm here in this church building looking at a whole lot of empty chairs in front of me. And it's also why today's sermon and this sermon topic goes along with a reading that fits so well into our lives, if we allow it to. If you haven't yet, I'd ask you to pause this video right here, and please go back to Trinity's website at www.trinitywvc.org and open up the order of worship material for today. It should be posted right along with this sermon presentation. And I ask you to read through, sing through, pray through the first portion, either by yourself, if you're watching this by yourself, or with those in your household if you've gathered to watch this and be part of a worship service as a family. So pause now, and I promise I'll be here when you get back. You're back? Great! Is the reading today from the Gospel according to Luke perfect or what for these times of frantic buying and hoarding? Let me read it to you again from a slightly different version, and maybe you'll think it through even more. Here's how it goes. Don't chase after what you will eat and what you will drink. Stop worrying. All the nations of the world long for these things. Don't be afraid, little flock, because your Abba delights in giving you the kingdom. Sell your possessions and give to those in need. Make for yourselves wallets that don't wear out, a treasure in heaven that never runs out. No thief comes near there, and no moth destroys. Where your treasure is, there your heart will be too. That, of course, is the Gospel of Luke, chapter 12, 29 through 34. Here's what the originators of this sermon series wrote about this reading to kind of inspire people to preach. It goes like this. No one at the end of their life would say, "I should have spent more time in the office." And yet many of us live with the tyranny of measuring up that keeps us weighed down. Lightening the load of expectations and shoulds is one way to lighten up as well as to literally lighten the clutter that crowds out our serenity. How do we create space to flourish in the way God's intends. Now that interpretation of Luke's message contains some really great questions, but even they were written, obviously, for a less hectic time. As you know, I really dislike what is called proof texting. That's taking a small bit of Bible writing and presenting it either in context or a lot of times out of context to prove a particular point that you'd like to make, either theologically or just in the space of time you're working with. But this morning, afternoon or evening, while you are worshiping with me, the first and the last lines of this gospel message seem to be focusing on us right now and right here. Don't chase, now, if I could talk, don't chase after what you will eat and what you will drink. Stop worrying. All the nations of the world long for these things. Don't be afraid, little flock, because your Abba delights in giving you the kingdom. And then it finishes with those famous words, where your treasure is, there your heart will be too. Frantic buying and stockpiling of stuff, particularly those things that we really aren't in short supply of, like toilet paper, for heaven's sakes. They are still manufacturing toilet paper. How about bottled water? Yeah, they're still bottling it. My favorite, hand sanitizer. They're still making it as fast as they can. Those three probably should be known as the big three at this point. But people are panic buying other items as well. And like I said last week, it's easy to get caught up in that frantic, almost vibrating pace of making sure you got enough. Especially with Utahns being able to reply to that question that's being asked all over the country and all over the world. Hey, can dealing with this virus get any harder? And yet we here in Utah could stand up and say, hey, hold my beer, we're going to add an earthquake to this mess. What I want to say to you today, what I hear being said in that Luke gospel is, what an opportunity. Where your treasure is, there your heart will be too. It is the ultimate in slow yourself down questions almost. Just where is our heart focused? Where are our collective hearts focused? Does having 300 rolls of toilet paper really trump checking on that elderly neighbor just to make sure they're okay? Does dealing with the new black market of hand sanitizer when washing our hands with soap is actually a much better virus fighter, doesn't that tell us something about where our hearts and heads are focusing? Christians, hear this. Don't be afraid, little flock, because your Abba delights in giving you the kingdom. Now, don't get me wrong. Being prepared is not a bad thing, as long as we keep it in perspective. And that perspective is that we live in a world created and sustained by a very unhurried God. Yes, the earth still adjusts itself every once in a while. We call it earthquakes. What we have just realized is that we live here in this valley in the shadow of some pretty glaring reminders that earthquakes happen. Just because we moved, in the grand scheme of things, just a short while into this valley does not mean that earthquakes are going to stop happening. Or that virus, or viruses, I think that's how you say it, won't get in the way of our desired lifestyles. What our gospel voice is reminding us is that our Abba, our Papa, if you will, our Creator, reminds us where our hearts need to be focused. Not on the big three of sanitizer, water, and TP, but on that great commandment of love God and love our neighbor. This right here and right now is our chance to check in with our God and allow God's unhurriedness to calm us down just a bit at least, and put what is important back into perspective. But then, we're also charged with physically distancing ourselves so as not to let this virus gain control of us. But at the same time, I think we're also charged to socially become closer with each other. And we have the most inventive, the most imaginative, and sometimes it seems almost the miraculous advantage over past generations. With all the various forms of communications that we have been basically handed in our lifetime, we can connect and reconnect with the neighbors that Jesus was talking about. But even all these connection possibilities still take a bit of slowing down sometimes to allow them to be used as a way to love our neighbors. So what I'm asking you today, this morning, this afternoon, or this evening, depending on when you're watching this, is to take a breath. Gather your thoughts around those folks that would treasure a phone call, would smile at a text just because it's from you, would jump for joy at a FaceTime moment where you think you can show them that the dog is doing something brand new, right? I urge you to walk outside today. Wave to the world. Check in with your neighbors, particularly those that may be elderly and scared, or those who might have special needs like children and physical disabilities or heart issues that would just treasure somebody to say, "How you doing?" And then I ask you to check in with yourself. Because the rest of that commandment is love God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. Love your neighbor as yourself. Check in with yourselves, folks. Breathe. Just breathe. And offer your particular God-given talent for shalom to the world. And with that, I offer you my shalom, church family, and ask you to pass it on. And with that, I'll ask you to take that breath and pray whatever prayer you need to hold up right at this time. I'm going to pray my prayer for the world. And once again, if my prayer is a little shorter than yours, you just keep on going. Do what you need to do. Be who God needs you to be. Slow down and breathe. Let's pray. God, I ask you to shed your light on all of us in the midst of our frantic being. Help us to remember your words, and that what's really important is what we do for ourselves, with you, and for others. I ask particularly attention be paid by us to our children, in whatever relationship they happen to be, whether they're blood relatives or just, as I said last week, the kid down the street. Help us to allow them to live into their anxiety and let us help them express it in a constructive and life-giving way. God, on this Sunday in the time of Lent, remind us that we're moving towards the upper room. We'll be walking from there to the garden. We'll be carrying a cross with you up a hill to a place called Golgotha. But most of all, we'll be running when we hear the message that the stone has been rolled away and the tomb is empty. Help us to move towards the Easter of our lives, whatever that may mean, in a calm, collected, shalom-like way that you've been allowing all of us to experience if we just slow down long enough to listen and to breathe. Amen. Shalom Aleichem, my friends.